Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at misinformation,
Ooh,
specifically some stuff that's been happening on The View.
okay.
We've got a great segment from Sky News Australia that really analyzes it, breaks it down, and I think the goal today is to just
Yeah.
really look at what happened and
Yeah.
what it means for us as viewers and consumers of information.
Absolutely.
This first one is something that really gets you thinking legally.
Yeah.
It involves Sunny Hostin
Okay.
and comments she made about Congressman Matt Gaetz.
Right.
So for those who don't know, Gaetz was accused of some pretty serious things.
He was accused of having a relationship with a minor and potentially violating sex trafficking laws.
Right.
It's important to remember that Gaetz has always very strongly denied all of these allegations.
And to this day, no charges have ever been filed against him, even after a Department of Justice investigation.
Right.
But on The View Terme, Hostin basically linked Gaetz directly to these accusations on air.
And that's where things get really tricky because, everyone is entitled to their opinion. But when you're on a public platform
Sure.
and you make accusations like that, that could be false. It can have really serious legal implications.
Makes you wonder, does apologizing later on really fix the problem?
That's a great question.
I mean, legally speaking, there's this whole thing about defamation,
Right.
which basically means you're harming someone's reputation by making false statements.
Exactly.
And for a public figure like Gaetz, that's
Even more tricky.
even more tricky.
Yeah.
So even though Hostin later read a legal note correcting her statement on air, it might not be enough to actually undo any of the harm.
Right. And think about it from the viewer's perspective. They might have heard that initial accusation,
Totally.
then they totally miss the correction later on.
Right.
It shows just how sticky misinformation can be.
I mean, it makes me think as a consumer of information.
Yeah.
Like, how do I know what's true anymore?
That's the million-dollar question these days, right? I mean, it really underscores how important critical thinking is, especially when you're dealing with information that might
Appeal to our emotions.
appeal to your emotions.
Or biases.
Exactly.
It's almost like we need to be constantly on guard, questioning everything we see.
Kind of, yeah. And I think that leads us nicely into our second case study,
Okay?
this time involving Whoopi Goldberg.
All right, let's unpack this.
So this one involves a bakery and a claim that kind of caught fire online.
So Goldberg basically claimed on The View that a bakery refused to make her birthday cake because of her political views.
Right.
Even suggesting it could be because she's a woman, which, if true,
Yeah.
would be outrageous.
Absolutely. I mean, accusations of discrimination should be taken very seriously.
Of course.
However, in this particular case, further investigation actually revealed a very simple explanation.
Yeah, a little less scandalous.
Yes, a little less scandalous.
The bakery actually had a broken boiler at the time,
Yeah,
which prevented them from fulfilling any orders at all,
including Goldberg.
including Goldberg's.
Right.
And this was corroborated in Nick Pick. They have a long-standing reputation in the community.
Yeah,
But despite that, Goldberg kind of doubled down on her initial claim,
she did.
even hinting at some kind of, discriminatory motive,
Yeah,
even when there was evidence to the contrary.
right.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
A Sky News contributor, Brad Palumbo, actually weighed in on this
Yeah.
and criticized Goldberg for kind of clinging to this idea of being a victim despite the facts.
Yeah.
He suggests that for some in the media playing the victim can actually be advantageous.
Right, and Palumbo's comments really tie into this larger conversation that's been going on in society
Okay.
about something that people call victimhood culture.
What is victimhood culture?
So it's this idea that individuals or groups might misinterpret events
Okay.
or kind of exaggerate their own suffering in order to get sympathy or attention.
So how do we as viewers, as consumers of information, how do we navigate that?
Yeah.
How do we know when it's genuine discrimination and when it's something like this bakery incident that's more nuanced?
It requires a lot of critical thinking.
Okay.
We have to be willing to consider other people's perspectives and also to question the stories that we're being told.
Right.
It also requires a good bit of skepticism,
Okay.
especially when information is presented in a way that really plays on our emotions.
It's like we need to develop a sixth sense for BS.
You know what? That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And I think the more we use that critical thinking muscle, the better we'll be at navigating all of this complicated information that's out there.
So this is giving me a lot to think about.
Okay.
But before we go too far down that road,
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear more of your thoughts on this victimhood culture
Sure.
that you mentioned.
It's a really complicated topic.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of debate surrounding it.
Okay.
But one thing to think about is how this perceived need to be a victim
Mm-hmm.
might actually be stopping us from dealing with real issues of injustice.
Okay, that's an interesting point. We're going to need to unpack that a little more.
Okay.
Ready to keep going.
Absolutely.
So we were talking about victimhood culture. Can you kind of tell me what that actually means? Like, how does that play out in real life?
Well, just imagine, someone who just jumps to the conclusion that they were discriminated against. Maybe they didn't get a job
Okay.
or a
Yes.
promotion.
Right.
Now, discrimination definitely exists.
Of course.
It's a very real issue.
Yeah.
But sometimes, there might be other factors at play that have nothing to do with prejudice.
So it's like almost like assuming the worst right away.
Yeah, without considering all the other explanations.
Right.
And while it's important to be aware of injustice and to fight against it,
Sure.
constantly seeing yourself as a victim can actually be kind of counterproductive.
How so?
Well, for one thing, it can lead to a sense of powerlessness.
Okay.
If you think that you're being wronged all the time or that the system is rigged against you, you're probably less likely to try to improve your situation.
It's like that saying, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're right.
Exactly. And also on like a bigger societal level,
Yeah.
this focus on victimhood
Mm-hmm.
can make it harder to have like good conversations about complex issues.
Okay.
If everyone is so focused on their own narrative of being wronged,
Yeah.
it's hard to find common ground and work together to fix things.
So it's not about denying that people go through hard things or that discrimination doesn't exist.
Right.
But it's more about encouraging people to have a more balanced view.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that everyone has a role to play in addressing injustice, both individually and as a society.
Okay, so bringing it back to the incidents on The View,
Right.
do you think there's a connection between this victimhood culture idea
Potentially.
and how Hostin and Goldberg reacted?
It's possible. I mean, in both cases, they both seem to assume the worst right away,
Yeah.
and they wanted to be seen as victims, even when the evidence didn't really support it.
And that kind of ties back into this bigger problem of misinformation.
Exactly.
Because once those ideas take hold, it can be so hard to get rid of them.
It really can, even when there's evidence that proves otherwise.
Right, and that's why it's so important to think critically. Right.
It really is. We need to be able to look at information objectively,
Yeah.
question our own biases, and be open to the idea that maybe we're wrong.
Which is easier said than done
It is.
when we're bombarded with information constantly.
Yeah. And a lot of it is designed to make us feel a certain way.
Exactly.
It's a challenge for sure, but the more we think critically,
Yeah.
the better we get at figuring out what's true and what's not.
Okay, so let's get practical here.
Okay.
If I'm listening to this and I want to be more careful about the information I see and hear,
Yeah.
where do I even start?
A good place to start is by diversifying your media diet.
Okay, what does it even mean?
It means don't just rely on one or two sources for all your news. Look for perspectives from across the political spectrum.
So don't just stick to the stuff that I already agree with.
Exactly. Challenge yourself to engage with things you might not agree with.
Okay.
You might not change your mind,
Sure.
but you'll get a better understanding of the issue,
Yeah.
and you'll probably learn something about your own biases.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. What about when I see like a specific news article or something on social media? How can I tell if it's actually real?
Always check the source.
Okay.
Is it a reliable news organization, a well-respected university, or a government agency?
Right.
Or is it a blog with a clear agenda, or just some random person on social media?
So basically do a background check on the source.
Yeah, and then look for evidence.
Okay.
Does the article have citations or studies or data? Or is it just like hearsay or anonymous claims?
Right, and I shouldn't just take their word for it.
No, even if they seem really sure of themselves.
Even if they have a fancy title?
Everyone has an agenda, even if they don't realize it. So it's always best to be a little skeptical and check to see if other sources are saying the same thing.
This is making a lot more sense, but I gotta be honest, it kind of feels overwhelming.
Yeah.
Like, am I supposed to fact check everything I see?
You don't have to fact check every single thing.
Okay.
But learning to think critically will help you see red flags and decide if you can trust the information.
So it's about building a habit of questioning
Yeah.
and not just believing everything I see.
Exactly. And that's a skill that will help you with everything, not just information. It's about being in charge of what you understand about the world.
Right.
And not just passively taking in whatever you see.
That's a good point. So we've talked about how we as individuals can be more careful with information.
Right.
But what about the media themselves?
Mm.
Like, what are they supposed to be doing to stop misinformation?
Well, that's something people debate a lot.
Okay.
Some people think that platforms like Facebook and Twitter
Yeah.
should check facts and take down false information. But other people worry about censorship and bias in those decisions.
Yeah, it's a tough balance.
It is. On one hand, we don't want platforms to tell us what we can and can't see.
Right.
But on the other hand, if we let misinformation spread freely, it can have really bad consequences.
Exactly. And that's where this idea of media literacy comes in.
Yes.
What's that?
It's about giving people the tools to be their own fact checkers.
Okay.
To know how to decide for themselves if information is reliable.
So we can't rely on others to do it for us.
Right. We need to learn to do it ourselves.
Okay. And how do we do that?
It means understanding how to spot bias, how to judge sources, and how to tell the difference between fact and opinion.
Okay.
It's about healthy skepticism and not believing everything you see online.
That's a tall order. Who's supposed to teach us all this stuff?
You know, it's everyone's responsibility.
Oh.
Schools, parents, community groups, even media companies can help.
Yeah.
But in the end, it's up to each of us to be proactive and take charge of the information we consume.
So it's not just about what we see and hear,
Right.
but how we see and hear it.
Exactly. It's about paying attention, being critical, and being willing to have tough conversations, even when it's uncomfortable.
Right.
Because in a world full of information,
Yeah.
being able to tell the truth from lies is more important than ever.
That's a great point. And before we move on, I think it's worth saying that even when we're trying to share good information, it can backfire if we're not careful.
Oh, absolutely. It's not enough to just be careful about what we believe ourselves.
Right.
We also have to think about what we share with other people,
Especially on social media.
especially on social media where things can spread like wildfire.
It's like that old saying, a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is putting on its shoes.
Yeah.
But now with the internet, it's like that lie can travel around the world 1,000 times
Right.
before the truth even gets out of bed.
Exactly. And that's where we need to stop and think.
Yeah.
Before we share anything online. Ask ourselves, did I check this? What could happen if I spread this, even if I think it's true?
It's like we need a whole new set of rules for the internet,
Right.
like a code of conduct.
Yeah. And part of that code should be admitting when we're wrong. If we share something that isn't true,
Yeah.
it's important to say so
Right.
and try to fix it.
Which is hard.
It is. Admitting you're wrong is never easy, especially online where it feels like everything is permanent.
Right.
But it's really important if you want to be a responsible person online.
Yeah.
And it means putting truth and facts above your ego or always being right.
Well said. We've talked about a lot today.
Yeah.
We started with some specific examples of misinformation on The View.
Right.
And then we talked about some pretty big ideas about how people act,
Yeah.
societal trends, and the responsibilities we all have when it comes to information in the digital age.
It's been a fascinating conversation.
It has.
And I hope everyone listening is leaving with a better understanding
Yeah.
of how complicated this is.
And that they feel like they can be more careful about the information they take in and share.
Totally agree. But before we wrap up this deep dive,
Okay.
I have one final thought-provoking question.
Ooh, I like it. Hit me.
So in a time when we have so much information and opinions flying around, and anyone can share their thoughts with the world with just a phone,
Yeah.
what are we as individuals responsible for when it comes to making sure the information we share is true?
That's a really great question, and I think we'll be trying to figure that out for a long time.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, fighting misinformation isn't just about proving false claims wrong.
Right.
It's about creating a culture where people share information responsibly and where truth and accuracy are the most important things.
And that's something we all have to work on.
Exactly. So to everyone listening, I'll leave you with this. Be critical, be curious, and be the change you want to see when it comes to information.
Yeah.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, keep the conversation going. Yeah, that's a really interesting point to think about. You know, we are all part of this big system of information.
We are.
We take it in, but we also spread it around. And that makes you think about, like, the intention behind it all.
The intention.
You know, someone trying to inform me or persuade me or manipulate me.
Right, or even just entertain you.
Yeah.
It's true. Information can be used in so many ways.
Mhm.
And it's up to us to figure out what someone is trying to do with it.
Right. And sometimes it's not that easy,
It's not.
especially when it's like someone's opinion disguised as a fact.
Right. Or when there's bias, that's not so obvious.
So how do we get better at spotting those subtle things, like
Yeah.
bias and manipulation?
Okay.
Like, what are some red flags to watch out for?
Well, one thing is to listen to the language they're using.
Okay.
If they're using a lot of words that make you feel strong emotions, like fear or anger or outrage, that could be a sign that they're trying to sway you without giving you all the facts.
So they're using your emotions to get you on their side.
Exactly, instead of using logic and reason.
Right. Another thing I've noticed is how they frame the story.
Yes, absolutely. How they present the issue, what they choose to include or leave out,
Yeah.
that can really change how you see things.
So two different news sources could be talking about the same event,
Right.
but they could focus on different parts of it
Yeah,
or use different words,
exactly.
and that could lead people to totally different conclusions.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to look at things from different angles and be aware of the biases that different sources might have. It's like putting a puzzle together. You need all the pieces to see the whole picture.
This has been a really eye-opening conversation.
Good.
I feel like I'm starting to look at information in a whole new way.
That's great.
It's not just about listening or reading and taking it all in. It's about questioning things and coming to my own conclusions.
Exactly. And that's what we want you to take away from this deep dive. We want you to feel confident and use critical thinking when you're dealing with information.
That's great. And before we wrap things up, I think it's important to remember that even when we're trying to be responsible with information, things can still go wrong.
Absolutely.
Like, even if our intentions are good,
It's true.
we can still accidentally spread misinformation.
Yeah, it's not enough to just be careful about what we believe.
Right.
We also have to be careful about what we share with others.
Especially online.
Especially online, because things can spread so quickly.
Exactly. And once it's out there,
Yeah,
it's hard to take it back.
it really is.
So what can we do?
Well, I think we need to be more aware of the power of sharing. We have to realize that what we share online can have a big impact.
Yeah.
So we need to stop and think before we hit that share button.
Right.
Ask ourselves some questions.
Like,
is this really true? Where did this come from? What could happen if I share this, even if I think it's true?
That's good advice. I think this all comes down to personal responsibility.
It does.
Like, we all have a role to play in stopping the spread of misinformation.
We do.
And it starts with being more careful about what we share.
Absolutely.
Well, I think we've covered just about everything today.
I think so, too.
This has been a really fascinating discussion.
It has been.
We've talked about those specific incidents on The View.
Yeah.
But we've also gone deeper into some bigger ideas.
Yeah.
About how our society works, how we think as individuals, and how we should be handling information in this digital age.
It's a lot to think about.
It is, but it's important stuff.
It is.
And I hope our listeners are leaving today feeling more informed and empowered.
I hope so, too.
So to everyone listening out there, keep those critical thinking skills sharp. Stay curious and be careful about what you share online. And that's a wrap on this deep dive. Until next time, thanks for listening.